What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so to be honest with you guys, Injustice actually moved a lot faster than I thought it would, and that was one of the things that really kind of took me by surprise, is because you gotta remember, whenever we break like a story into segments, it usually takes us like 5-6 videos in order to finish the whole thing. With Injustice, with the first year, it took us 2 videos. With the second year, 2 videos. The third year, 2 videos. Year 4, the exact same thing. But year 5 is a little bit different, and the reason why I say that is because year 5 is where we get down to brass taxes. I mean, we already covered the first part of year 5, you know, all that kind of good stuff, but I was sitting here thinking, Injustice 2 doesn't come out until April 11th. And even then, we still have to wait for the first story arc to finish. Now, it may be that the first story arc, you know, finishes after 3 weeks, in which case we'll just jump into that first story arc when it's done. But for year 5, it's significant in the sense that this is where we begin to lead into the video game. This is where all the loose ends are supposed to be getting tied up. This is where all the major significant moments for those of you guys who played the game begin to kind of question and begin to kind of see things coming to their full end. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of pepper out year 5 videos a little more extensively than I intended, which is to say we're going to do a couple more videos on this. We're really not going to kind of cram it down into a really short thing. We're going to add a few more videos, you know, than I originally intended. But in the last video, and I left you guys on one hell of a cliffhanger. I sometimes I gotta be honest with you, Rob Core. Sometimes I just love leaving you guys on cliffhangers because I love going through the comments and seeing your responses where you're just like, "What? No! You can't just stop there, man!" Like I love doing that from time to time because it's just kind of a fun way to sort of mess with you guys a little bit. But in any event, we basically have Superman and Bizarro meeting for the very first time. Now, on the surface, this is just Superman and Bizarro fighting, right? But there's actually going to be a line that comes from Alfred later on that will be huge when it comes to this little tidbit here. But on the surface, you know, like this immediate confrontation, Superman's like, what the heck's going on? Because remember, you know, Bizarro had made these scattered appearances here and there, but no one knew who he was. Remember, Bizarro was created by Lex Luthor, and so Bizarro is basically Lex Luthor's little secret. Bizarro's not supposed to be out there. He just basically escaped in the midst of the conclusion of year 4, and then Lex Luthor's been trying to track him down ever since. And so because of this, you know, Superman basically comes across what is, for all intents and purposes, a clone of himself. Now, Superman doesn't know that it's a clone, but Superman's kind of left to believe that. He's the last son of Krypton, or at least he's supposed to be the last child of Krypton. There should be no reason why another Kryptonian exists. Not only that, Bizarro looks like Superman. So just by putting 2 and 2 together, you know, it comes across being pretty easily as being a clone. But even then, Superman begins to kind of ask the question, are you from another dimension? Are you some kind of genetic creation? Because at this point, there are no options that are not on the table here. I mean, at this point in Injustice, Superman's traveled to Apokolips. He's fought Greek gods, Green Lantern Corps going against the Sinestro Corps, to say nothing of the other corps of the Indigo Tribe, and to say nothing of the Red Lanterns. I mean, those are all possibilities that could exist out there. It's just in Injustice, we haven't seen them yet. We don't even know if they're real. And so what really kind of goes on here is this idea that in the mind of Superman, he doesn't know where Bizarro came from. He doesn't know why Bizarro's here. But what ends up happening is they end up fighting anyway. Now, of course, the reason why is because this just makes good sense. I mean, you can't have Bizarro and Superman encounter one another and not fight. Not only that, remember, Solomon Grundy is still part of the equation. That's one of the reasons why I love Solomon Grundy, because all he does is just run off the rhyme of Solomon Grundy. And it's so cool to see, you know, born on a Monday. You know, it's one of those really, really great moments because it's just one of these things where it's like he's the predecessor to Marvel's Incredible Hulk. You know, and even after Marvel introduced the Incredible Hulk, Solomon Grundy was reworked and revamped to somewhat symbolize or to be somewhat similar to Marvel's Incredible Hulk. It's this kind of give and take in the comic book community that constantly goes back and forth between all the major publishers. But the idea here is that, you know, Solomon Grundy, really the attention of both really Bizarro and Superman is given to Solomon Grundy because Solomon Grundy is such a credible threat. You know, Bizarro is just really more of like a child who's curious about the situation. Superman's trying to keep things contained. Solomon Grundy just wants to wreck stuff. Now, of course, bringing in Hal Jordan to the equation offers a little bit of help, you know, on Superman's side, simply because of the constructs, so on and so forth, you know. But what ends up happening here is the question everybody has is, who is Bizarro? And when Hal Jordan makes the comment of Bizarro, you know, calling him Bizarro, well, then Bizarro basically just kind of takes off. He's like, look, if you're not going to respect me, you know, I'm Superman. If you're not going to respect me, then I'm just going to go home. Because remember, Bizarro kind of has these weird traits where it's like he doesn't like to be called, you know, Bizarro, he doesn't like to be made fun of. He doesn't like to be, you know, talked down to, different things like that. You know,
he effectively abandons the situation, leaving Superman to wonder what in the heck's going on. Now from here, Superman incapacitates Solomon Grundy, takes Solomon Grundy to Lex Luthor and says, do something with him, do whatever it is that you did with Doomsday, brainwash him, whatever you need to do, but make him an asset for the regime. But this is when we start to switch over to Damian Wayne. That's what I love about this, because within the realm of the Bat family, Alfred is kind of like this sacred guy, you know, in the sense that Alfred is the one guy that no matter what rift is going on in the members of the Bat family, Alfred is neutral territory. Alfred, you know, looks at Damian Wayne and says, you're the son of Batman. Right? You're not just some guy. You're not just some character out there. Like, you are the son of Batman. Even if you were like Dick Grayson, or even if you were Jason Todd, it wouldn't be the same. You're his biological son. And he says, you have to mend this rift. Not only that, but what they're basically talking about here is they're talking about the idea of why it is that Damian Wayne has allied himself with Superman. Now, the reason why Damian's here in the first place is because he's having doubts. Remember, the one thing we have to keep in mind with what's going on in Injustice right now is Damian Wayne is still, for all intents and purposes, a kid. He's basically a teenager. He's a little bit older, but he's not a man. He's not a guy in his 30s or his 40s. He's not as old as Superman. He's not as old as Batman. He's still basically a teenager. So what he's essentially going through right now is everything the teenagers go through compounded with the current situation. I mean, if you're 20 or you're 30 years old, imagine where you were when you were 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, trying to figure out your place in the world, trying to understand what direction you're going in, trying to figure out what you stand for and what you believe in. And then imagine that now your loyalties are torn between a man that literally brought peace to the world versus your father. And then turn around and compound that with the idea that you yourself don't even know whether or not you're doing the right thing. That's where Damian Wayne is at. He's being pulled in every single direction conceivable. Not only that, he was basically responsible and still feels he's responsible for the death of Dick Grayson. And so because of this, it has Damian Wayne's mind all over the place. It has him everywhere. And this is really when he's just kind of sitting down and he's questioning, can Superman win? Because remember, he believes that Superman's doing the right thing. The goal of Batman has always to have been eliminate crime. The goal of Batman was always to have been bring peace to the world. The difference, or the reason why Damian Wayne allied himself with Superman, is because in Damian Wayne's mind, as a student of the League of Assassins, as somebody who was basically taught to kill, to eliminate threats by any means necessary, but then turn around and you know, only to meet Batman, to more or less have the belief instilled in him not to kill people, while it doesn't make Damian an inherent good guy, while he doesn't wholeheartedly believe in his father, he's more like Superman than he is like Batman. Damian Wayne's ideology is to follow Batman's lead, to eliminate crime, but he's also willing to follow Superman's lead to kill those who would commit crimes. And that's what's interesting, is because it creates this crazy situation. You know, if for example, I were to tell you that whenever a person commits a crime, they should just be executed for that crime and no questions are asked. Well, then people will say, well, that doesn't deter people from committing crimes. Yeah, but we're not trying to deter them from committing crimes. We're trying to eliminate repeat offenders. A person can't go back out and rob a bank once they're released from jail if they were never put in jail and they were killed instead. And so it creates like these really wild philosophies and situations. But then again, what it does is it puts you in a circumstance where you basically lose your humanity, because instead of saying, look, everybody deserves a second chance, you're just like, man, I really hope you didn't run a red light, because if you did, it's curtains, it's drapes, you're on the chopping block and your family's never going to see or hear from you again. And so it creates these really wild situations. And that's why Damian Wayne is so torn. That's why he's so pulled. But in the end, Alfred basically says, look, Superman can't win. And when Damian says why, Alfred says, because Batman has experienced heinous things. But in the end, Batman has come out on top because he's smarter, because he's a fearless man. Superman's life is mired by fear. And that is the inherent difference between the two. That's the whole basis of Injustice. That's the point of the Injustice story in relation to Superman. People look at Superman and they say, man, you know, there's this guy who's just like this pillar of greatness. He stands for everything. No. Superman is a guy who is afraid that because he lost Lois Lane, that he's going to lose everything else. Superman has essentially become so extreme and become so dangerous because he's afraid he'll lose Wonder Woman, because he's afraid he'll lose Hal Jordan, that he'll lose Damian Wayne, that he'll lose Batman, that he'll lose his friends. There's a reason why he's not killing Batman. There's a reason why he wants to take Batman prisoner. If Superman wanted to kill Batman, he'd have killed him already. We saw the inner thoughts of Superman, what he really believes in his heart of hearts, when he had his dream halfway through year 4. And so because of this, again, it creates this really cool situation, because what this does is this really points to the idea that maybe it's true that Superman just can't win. You know, Batman can't defeat Superman, but it doesn't mean that Superman can't be defeated by another means. Now from here, we actually end up following Damian Wayne when he travels to go see Catwoman. Now again, at this point, keep in mind, Catwoman has basically walked away from the insurgency. She's walked away from Batman. She's allied herself with Harley Quinn, and Harley Quinn has some measure of loyalties for Catwoman just because of Gotham City Sirens, just because of the time they had together when they were basically, you know, kind of a vigilante group doing their own little, you know, Thelma and Louise, going crazy alongside Poison Ivy, you know, having their own little fun, being their own little group, and it worked out well. And that's why they have a lot of loyalties here. Even if it's not for that reason, it's because Catwoman would just let Harley Quinn just kind of run amok and do criminal stuff. But the idea here is that Damian Wayne is approaching Catwoman because she knows Batman better than anybody else. And because she knows Batman better than anybody else, she can offer Damian Wayne insight. And one of the things that I hope you guys notice here is that what Damian Wayne is basically doing is beating around the bush and talking to everybody but Batman. He's basically going through and he's saying, well, hey, Catwoman, you're like Batman in this capacity. Hey, Alfred, you're like Batman in this capacity. Going to these different people who are, you know, who all in some form or fashion represent what Batman believes, and then take all their advice, put it together and say, this is probably what my father would say, and then go forward with that action. He's systematically getting Batman's opinion without actually talking to Batman himself. And that's what makes it so cool, is because I would say that at the end of all this, Damian Wayne is still just ashamed. He's still just ashamed of the fact that he feels like he killed Dick Grayson, which he did. He hit him in the head with a baton. Dick Grayson fell down and his neck broke. Even Dick Grayson, you know, said, hey, look, man, you can't hold yourself guilty, but it doesn't matter. Damian Wayne still holds the guilt over himself. And even when he's talking to Catwoman, again, it's just kind of like this cat and mouse thing. They're going back and forth. They're doing a little bit of fighting, so on and so forth. But when it gets to the point where he begins to let his guard down, this is where things get ironic, because what Catwoman does is she sort of listens to him for a second, then usually really just uses like kind of a mace of sorts, gasses him, and then takes off. But if she hadn't done that, if she had talked to Damian Wayne, if she had literally listened to what he had to say, and they just sat down on the rooftop and they had a heart-to-heart conversation, I would say there's a 90% chance she could have pulled Damian back from where he was and brought him back over to Batman. But instead, she goes on the offensive. And when she does, it really just kind of sends Damian Wayne back into a defensive mode. Now remember, at this point in time, Damian Wayne is still very much self-destructive where he is right now. I mean, he's really in a dark place. And so it's really a matter of self-punishment. You know, it's really him just kind of, you know, looking at where he's at and saying, okay, look, I have to make up for past sins. I have to make up for the things that I've done before. I have to become a better person. I killed Dick Grayson. I stripped Bruce Wayne of what he calls his first son, what really is his first son. Because of that, I have to be his first son. I have to make amends. And so it's literally Damian Wayne saying, I have to become Nightwing. And so instead of being reasonable, instead of being rational in his anguish, in his grief, and in his anger, he makes a boneheaded decision. He literally goes into where the remainder of Gotham City's villains are holed out and attacks them all. Black Mask, Scarecrow, Mad Hatter, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, Man-Bat, you know, the whole 9 yards, all these guys. He goes through and just starts fighting them all. Now, he could take them out. He tries as best he can, and he does to a degree. The problem is that once the reserves start coming in, once Bronze Tiger, once all these guys start coming in, well, then it's just sheer numbers. Then it's overwhelming. And this is why I say Damian Wayne's motivation for fighting all these guys is half to fill the shoes of Dick Grayson. I mean, that's just half of what it is. You know, he just wants to fill the shoes of Dick Grayson. He wants to make amends and be Nightwing. The other half of this is I think he's praying for his own death. He's hoping that if he's gonna die honorably, die in battle, and then be spared his own grief. And so because of this, he's overwhelmed by the sheer force of numbers. Now remember, at this point in time, Dick Grayson is basically dead man. That's what we saw when it came to, like, you know, to years 3, year 4, you know, the whole idea of magic and so on and so forth. It was this idea that Dick Grayson's spirit was basically resurrected from the dead, and he now has the ability to just travel around the world as a ghost and take possession of people's bodies. And that's what he does. He takes possession of the body of Bronze Tiger, you know, of course, the martial arts criminal, and he literally just subdues everybody. I mean, he takes everybody out. Now, the reason why Dick Grayson was able to do this in the body of Bronze Tiger, where Damian Wayne wasn't, is because where Damian Wayne does have a lot more training with Dick Grayson, where I think he is the better fighter, all these villains were looking at Bronze Tiger like, what are you doing, man? You're on our side. That momentary second of guessing, that moment of not really knowing what's going on, gives Dick Grayson the opportunity to really subvert them all and to take pretty much all of them out. And so what this does is this transitions over to Cyborg. And what ends up happening is there's basically a gift that's been left behind for Damian Wayne while he was unconscious, while he was recovering, when his body was dropped off by Dick Grayson, you know, disguised as Bronze Tiger, and then took off before anybody knew what was going on. The present turns out to be the costume of Nightwing. And so in the game, this is how Damian Wayne gained the costume of Nightwing. You know, there's a message from Dick Grayson that's dropped off that basically says, you know, do you really need an invitation? Become Nightwing. Carry on the legacy that I started. Keep the mantle going. And so it's not like Damian Wayne stole the mantle of Nightwing for himself. Dick Grayson gave it to him. He said, become Nightwing. If this is what you need to move on, if this is what you need to become a better person, if this is what you need to recognize how dangerous Superman is, then take that mantle, become that guy. And so what happens is, of course, Superman visits Nightwing. And this is actually a really, really great conversation between the two, because what ends up happening here is as they're talking with one another. The question that Superman has is, why would you go and face all those villains by yourself? And Damian's response, has to do with courage and so on and so forth. And Superman replies by saying, hey, look, courage is a great thing, but courage is only good because of fear. You're only brave because you know the alternative is dying. And this is where we find out Alfred's right. Alfred is correct when he sits down and he says, look, Superman's life is mired by fear. He believes that being afraid is a strength, because being afraid means that he recognizes that he has something that he can lose. But being afraid also means that if you're afraid of losing those things, you'll go to the ends of the earth to make sure that you don't lose those things. And if in the process you end up losing yourself, well then what was the point? What was the point of the whole journey in the first place? And so fear ultimately leads to self-destruction. In the attempt to keep from losing the things you care about, you lose yourself. And so that's one of the things that Batman always harped on, is you cannot succumb to fear, because if you do, everything you fought for will have gone in vain, because then at some point you'll cross a line that you can't come back from. And what Damian does is he basically reiterates these things to Superman. He says, look, I was talking to Alfred. Alfred said, your life is mired by fear. Fear governs your life. The fear that you'll lose everything that you care about now, the fear you experience when you accidentally killed Lois and your unborn child. And of course, Superman on the surface is like, hey, look, man, I'm really glad you're on the team. It's good to have you back. I'm glad you're okay. But in the scowl that he has, we know that's true. Superman knows that's true. Superman's life is mired by fear. He knows that just as well as anybody else. And that's why it's so cool, is because Alfred's right. Alfred's 100% right. And that's what presents one of the most dangerous things for Superman, is because Superman's regime is powerful only so long as no one is willing to stand up to him. But if someone like Alfred, a butler with some medical skills and no abilities, is willing to say, yeah, Superman's a coward and his life is mired by fear, then Superman's regime isn't absolute, because if a regular butler would be afraid of him, well, what does that say about police? What does that say about armies? What does that say about governors and people of the world? While they wouldn't necessarily rise up against them now, they'll rise up against them later. And so Alfred presents a credible threat to Superman in terms of what he stands for and what it is that he represents. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comments Explain, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.